The airport was too bright for heartbreak.
Rows of people streamed past, dragging suitcases, chasing flights, chasing lives.
But Felicity Bennet sat still, the world blurring around her. She wore a simple white dress, the one she was supposed to wear on her honeymoon. The bouquet was gone, the makeup had faded, but the ring still glimmered faintly on her finger. Her phone vibrated.
One new message. I can't do this. I'm sorry, just 8 words.
Enough to collapse her entire future. She stared at the screen until it dimmed. The announcement board above flickered. Flight to Paris, boarding. The same destination printed on the ticket she was supposed to hold with her husband. Her throat burned, her chest hollowed. People walked around her, some glanced briefly. A woman in a white dress crying in Terminal 3, then looked away.
New York didn't stop for broken hearts. A flight attendant's voice echoed through the intercom.
Final boarding call for Flight 207 to Paris. Felicity stood abruptly, almost without meaning to. Maybe she'd still go. Maybe she'd disappear. But her legs wouldn't move. The sound of rolling luggage, children's laughter, and distant jet engines blurred together until all she could hear was the hollow echo of her own breathing. Then, a calm male voice behind her. "If you don't know where to go, come with me." She turned. The man standing there was in his mid-30s, tall, dressed in a dark coat. His presence was quiet, not commanding, but certain, like someone who had seen too much of the world to be surprised by anything anymore. He held 2 first-class tickets in his hand, and his eyes, grey, steady, carried a strange mix of peace and sadness. "Excuse me?" she managed to whisper. He smiled faintly. "You look like someone who needs to leave." Felicity blinked through her tears.
You don't even know me." He tilted his head slightly.
"True, but maybe that's exactly why I'm asking." She hesitated, glancing at the tickets in his hand. "Why me?" For a long moment he didn't answer. Then, in a voice barely above a whisper, he said, "Because I have 1 month to live."
"And I don't want to spend it alone." Her heart stopped. She stared at him, searching his face for any sign of a cruel joke, a hidden camera, a reason to laugh and walk away.
But there was none. His expression was calm, almost serene, as if he had already made peace with something long ago. "I'm sorry," she said softly, unsure whether she meant it for him or herself. He nodded. "So am I, but I'm getting on that plane."
"And I'd rather share a seat with someone who looks like they've forgotten how to breathe than with an empty chair." For a second, she almost smiled.
The absurdity of it, the tragedy of it, the quiet honesty in his tone. She wiped her tears with the back of her hand. "You don't even know my name?" "Then tell me on the plane," he said simply. Felicity looked down at her phone again, the lifeless screen, the unanswered calls, the shattered version of the life she thought she wanted. And then she looked back at him, this stranger with tired eyes and a heartbeat racing against time. "What's your name?" she asked quietly.
"Marvin," he said.
"Marvin Hale." She took a deep breath, the first one that didn't hurt. "Felicity," she replied. He smiled, extending his hand. "Then let's not waste a minute, Felicity." She stared at his outstretched hand for what felt like an eternity. Then slowly, she reached for it. Their fingers touched, hesitant, unsure. Yet in that single gesture was something weightier than coincidence. It was choice, without another word. They walked toward Gate 12 together. The attendants glanced at them as Marvin handed over the tickets. 2 first-class seats to Paris. The scanner beeped green. Felicity hesitated again, glancing back at the terminal, the life she was leaving behind, the dress, the plans, the heartbreak, frozen in time. "Scared?" Marvin asked softly. "Terrified," she admitted. He smiled. "Good. That means you're still alive." The words lingered, simple yet profound. She followed him down the jet bridge, each step heavier than the last, yet strangely freeing. Inside the plane, as the engines hummed to life, Felicity watched the city lights shimmer beneath the wings. She pressed her forehead against the glass, eyes reflecting the skyline she'd once called home. Marvin sat beside her, calm, his gaze fixed on the clouds outside. "Do you really have a month?" she asked quietly. He didn't look at her when he answered. "That's what they told me."
"But I've stopped counting," she turned to him, whispering. "And you chose to spend it with a stranger?"
Finally, he looked at her, really looked, and said, "Maybe that's the only way to remember I'm still human." The plane took off, lifting them both into a sky painted with fading orange and gold. Two strangers, running from different endings, headed toward the same uncertain beginning, and as the city vanished beneath the clouds, Felicity closed her eyes and whispered, almost to herself, "Then let's not waste a minute." The sky over Paris was the color of morning coffee, pale, slow, and quietly alive. When the plane landed, Felicity hadn't slept at all. She'd spent most of the flight staring at the window, wondering what she was doing, following a stranger halfway across the world because he said he was dying. It sounded insane, but somehow sitting beside Marvin had felt less lonely than anything she'd done in years. He didn't talk much during the flight. He just watched the horizon, calm, thoughtful, as though every second mattered to him in a way it didn't to others. When they stepped out of Charles de Gaulle Airport, Paris greeted them with rain, soft, shimmering drizzle that turned the streets silver. Marvin hailed a car. "You don't mind the rain, do you?" She shook her head, tucking a stray lock of hair behind her ear. "No, I've always liked it. It makes the world quieter." He smiled faintly. "Good. Quiet's nice." The car stopped in front of a tall building near the Seine, modern glass blending with Parisian stone. Marvin held the door for her, and for a second Felicity saw the faint tremor in his hand. But he didn't say anything about it, and she didn't ask. The elevator rose silently to the top floor, and when the doors opened, she gasped. A penthouse, walls of glass revealing the city stretched wide beneath them. The Eiffel Tower stood in the distance, lights still shimmering from the night before. "It's beautiful," she whispered. Marvin set his bag down and looked out the window. "It's strange," he said quietly. "I've been here before."
"So many times."
"Business meetings, conferences, dinners, I don't remember. But it feels different now." She turned to him. "Different how?" He smiled faintly, eyes distant. "Because this time, I'm actually seeing it." They spent the first day walking aimlessly through the city. Felicity still wore the same white dress under her coat, its fabric clinging to her skin when the rain fell harder. Marvin didn't complain. He just walked beside her, umbrella in hand, letting her set the pace. They stopped at a small cafe tucked between two flower shops. The smell of espresso and butter filled the air. Felicity watched people passing by through the rain-speckled glass. Couples laughing, old men feeding pigeons, tourists taking selfies. She stirred her coffee.
"It's strange," she murmured.
"Watching everyone live like nothing hurts." Marvin's gaze followed hers. "Maybe they're pretending too." She looked at him. "Are you?" He smiled without answering. Later that evening, back in the penthouse, Marvin stood by the window again. The city lights reflected in his eyes, gold and blue, like a living painting. Felicity joined him, holding 2 mugs of tea.
"You've been staring for hours." "I know," he said softly. "It's like the first time I've ever seen the world in color." She frowned slightly.
"Haven't you traveled a lot?" He nodded. "Everywhere. Tokyo, Rome, Cape Town, Dubai. But when you're busy surviving, you forget to look." There was something in the way he said it. Not bitterness, just truth. Felicity handed him a mug. "Then maybe it's time you start looking." He turned to her, a flicker of amusement lighting his face.
"Is that an invitation?"
She smirked. "More like a challenge." That night, The rain returned, soft and rhythmic against the glass. Felicity sat on the couch watching lightning flicker over the city. Marvin walked to the balcony, opened the door and stepped outside into the drizzle. "Marvin, you'll get soaked," she said. He laughed quietly.
"Then join me," she hesitated, then did.
The rain was cold, almost electric, but freeing. They stood there side by side, water sliding down their faces. "You're insane," she said, half laughing, half shivering. He looked at her, a rare spark in his eyes. "Maybe, but when you have a month left, everything that used to feel crazy starts to make sense." For a moment, she couldn't breathe. His words were too calm, too real. He noticed her silence and softened his tone. "Don't look at me like that, Felicity."
"I don't want to be the dying man in the story." "Then what do you want to be?"
she asked quietly. He thought for a moment, the rain tracing silver lines on his skin. Someone who finally lived right before it was too late. The city glowed around them, 1,000 stories unfolding at once, and somehow theirs felt the smallest, yet the most infinite. When they finally came back inside, dripping and laughing, Marvin handed her a towel. "You're impossible," she said.
"Wringing her hair dry, so I've been told." She laughed, shaking her head.
"You don't act like someone with a month left." He met her eyes, a small smile on his lips. "Maybe because you make me forget that I am." Her laughter faded. The air between them thickened with something quieter. Not romance, not yet, but connection. Two strangers who had found a strange safety in each other's brokenness. Marvin walked to the piano in the corner of the room. It was covered with a thin layer of dust. He pressed one key and a soft, trembling note filled the air. "Do you play?" Felicity asked. "I used to," he said. Then life got too loud. She sat on the nearby chair, hugging her knees. "Play something now." He hesitated, then played a single melody, fragile but full of longing. When the last note faded, Felicity whispered, "You really see the world differently, don't you?" Marvin looked at her, then out the window toward the glowing tower.
"Not differently," he said softly.
Just finally. And for the first time that day, Felicity realized maybe they weren't running from life at all. Maybe they were running back to it. By the third night in Paris, the rain had stopped, leaving the air washed clean and soft. The city smelled of stone, jasmine, and freshly baked bread. Marvin was sitting by the window again, sketching something in a small notebook. Felicity leaned on the kitchen counter, watching him quietly. "What are you writing?" she asked. He didn't look up. "Not writing, just trying to remember." "Remember what?" He paused for a moment, then looked up at her, eyes glinting with something unreadable. "What it feels like to be alive." His words lingered in the air between them, fragile, unguarded. Felicity didn't know how to answer, so she just poured 2 glasses of wine and sat across from him. For hours, they talked, not about travel plans or money, but about the things people usually hide. Felicity told him about her failed engagement, how she'd found out her fiancé had been cheating just weeks before the wedding. "I thought I'd never love again," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "Because every time I tried to, I ended up feeling like a fool." Marvin listened without interrupting. "Maybe being a fool for love is better than never feeling it at all," she smiled wryly. "Easy for you to say. You look like the kind of man who's never been left standing at the altar." He chuckled, the sound soft but genuine. "I've been left plenty of times, maybe not at the altar, but in other ways." Something in his tone made her lift her gaze. "By who?" He hesitated, eyes turning distant. "By everyone who thought money could replace love." That silence that followed wasn't uncomfortable. It was the kind of silence that only existed between two people who no longer felt the need to pretend. The days passed quietly. They walked through Montmartre, browsed second-hand bookstores, and got lost in tiny alleys that smelled of coffee and rain. Marvin watched everything with the fascination of a child. The way street artists painted portraits, the sound of a violinist by the river, the laughter of tourists. "You really do see the world differently," Felicity said one afternoon as they watched an old couple dance in the square. He smiled faintly. "Maybe because I know what it's like to not have much time left to see it." She looked at him, not with pity, but with quiet understanding. "Then I guess I'll make sure you see as much as you can." That evening, back at the penthouse, Felicity found an old record player in the corner of the living room. She brushed off the dust and smiled. "Do you dance, Mr. Blackwood?" Marvin arched an eyebrow. "Do I look like someone who dances?" "Exactly why you should try." Before he could refuse, she took his hand and placed it on her waist. He stiffened slightly, then let out a quiet breath as the music began. A soft, nostalgic melody that seemed to float between them. "You're terrible at this," she teased as he stumbled slightly. "I told you. Relax. Stop thinking." He laughed, an unguarded, full laugh that echoed through the room. It was the first time Felicity heard him sound. Young as the song slowed, he looked down at her. "When was the last time you danced like this?" She thought for a moment. "When I still believed in forever." He didn't answer, just tightened his hold slightly, as if afraid that if he let go, the moment would vanish. Later they sat on the balcony with a bottle of wine between them. The Eiffel Tower glittered in the distance, and the city hummed below, a lullaby for two people who didn't quite belong anywhere. Felicity tilted her head back, eyes closed.
"You know what I realized?" "What?"
"Every person here is chasing something. Love, success, meaning. But it may be the only thing worth chasing is peace." Marvin watched her quietly.
"And have you found it?"
She opened her eyes and met his gaze.
"Maybe I'm closer than I've ever been." He smiled faintly.
"Then I guess I'm lucky to be here." Hours passed, the wine disappeared, and the city grew silent. Felicity rested her head on her knees.
"Tell me something no one else knows about you." Marvin looked at her for a long time before answering.
"I used to play the piano for my mother before she died." Her voice softened. "What happened?" "She got sick. Cancer." He gave a small, bitter smile. "Life's got a sense of humor, doesn't it?" Felicity reached over, touching his hand.
"I'm sorry," he nodded.
"She used to tell me, 'Don't live like you're waiting to die.' Funny thing is, I didn't listen until I actually was." She didn't know what to say, so she simply held his hand. The silence that followed wasn't filled with sadness. It was full of something quieter, a kind of understanding that needed no words. When she finally got up to leave for her room, he stopped her. "Felicity?" She turned. He hesitated, just for a heartbeat, then said softly, "Thank you for making me forget." She smiled gently. "Forget what?"
"That I'm supposed to be dying." Her throat tightened.
"Then maybe we're both forgetting something." He looked at her curiously. "What are you forgetting?" She gave a faint, trembling smile. "That I was supposed to be broken." That night, Felicity lay awake, listening to the faint sound of the city outside. She thought about the man in the next room, the stranger who had turned her ruined wedding day into the beginning of something she couldn't yet name. It wasn't love, not yet, but it was something deeper, the kind of bond that forms when two lost souls recognize the same silence inside each other. And for the first time in years, Felicity fell asleep, not with regret, but with hope. The sound of water lapping against the wooden pier greeted them as they stepped out of the train station in Venice. The air smelled of salt and rain, and the sun danced across the canals like scattered glass. Marvin stood still for a long time, simply watching the gondolas glide past. "It's quieter than I imagined," he said. Felicity smiled, adjusting her sunglasses. "That's because you're listening, not just hearing." He turned to her with a smirk. "You and your poetic definitions," she grinned. "You love them. Maybe, he said softly. Maybe I love that they sound like hope. They took a gondola near sunset. The water glowed gold and the sky above shimmered with streaks of pink and amber. The gondolier hummed an Italian tune, the rhythm slow and dreamlike. Felicity sat opposite Marvin, the breeze playing with a strand of her hair. "You don't look like a man who's dying," she teased, half smiling. Marvin's eyes met hers, steady, quiet, unreadable. "Maybe that's because you make me forget that I am." The words hit her harder than she expected. There was no dramatics in his tone, only honesty. She looked away, pretending to study the reflections in the water. "Well," she said lightly, "I guess that makes me the best distraction you've ever had." He chuckled. "The best, and probably the most dangerous." She raised an eyebrow. "Dangerous? Me?" "Yes. Because I don't know what I'll do when you're not around." They spent the next few days wandering through the narrow alleys of Venice, eating gelato near Rialto Bridge, feeding pigeons in St. Mark's Square, and getting lost on purpose just to find their way back again. Felicity carried her camera everywhere, taking pictures of things most people overlooked. An old man reading alone by a window, a dog sleeping on a doorstep, a child chasing soap bubbles, Marvin teased her at first. "You could photograph the world's wonders, yet you choose pigeons and puddles." She only smiled. "Because the wonders are overrated. It's the small things that stay." He fell silent, realizing she was right. That evening, they dined at a small restaurant by the canal, where candles floated in glass jars and violins played softly. Marvin ordered wine, Felicity ordered laughter. She told him stories about her childhood, how she once wanted to be an astronaut, then a baker, then nothing at all when her parents divorced. He told her about growing up in a mansion so big it felt empty, how success had come too early and too easily, and how it never filled the void it was meant to. "Money doesn't buy silence," he said quietly. "It just buys better walls to hide it behind." Felicity looked at him for a long time, then whispered, "Maybe you just needed someone to hear the silence." Later that night, they returned to their hotel, a centuries-old building overlooking the water. The city glowed softly under the moon, every reflection rippling like a secret. Marvin stood by the window, one hand in his pocket, staring out. Felicity came up behind him. "What are you thinking?" He exhaled slowly. "That I've never seen beauty this temporary." She tilted her head.
"Everything beautiful is temporary."
"That's why it's beautiful." He smiled faintly, still looking out. "You sound like someone who's learned that the hard way." She didn't deny it. "Maybe I have." The next morning, they took a walk near the lagoon. Marvin looked pale, though he brushed it off as lack of sleep. When Felicity suggested they stop for coffee, he smiled as if to reassure her. "Are you okay?" she asked, studying him. "Perfect," he lied easily. But as they walked through the crowded square, she noticed his hand tremble slightly when he reached for his cup. She didn't say anything. Not yet. She simply placed her hand over his, steadying it. His eyes met hers, and for a moment, all the noise around them disappeared. "You don't have to hide it," she said softly. He swallowed hard. "Maybe I'm just not ready to be seen," she smiled faintly. "Then I'll wait until you are." That night it rained again. They stood under a single umbrella, laughing as puddles formed around their feet. "Venice in the rain," Felicity said. "Romantic cliché achieved," Marvin grinned. "What's next on the list?" "Dancing under the rain, obviously." Before he could protest, she pulled him toward the square. Music from a nearby cafe spilled into the air.
"Light and melancholic. You really love making me look ridiculous," he said, laughing. "Correction, I love making you live." And so they danced, awkwardly, clumsily, beautifully.
His shirt clung to his chest, her hair soaked, their laughter echoing off the empty walls. For a moment, nothing else existed. Not the illness, not the time running out, Not even the fear of goodbye. Only two people, drenched in rain and wonder, daring to love what was left of the world. When they finally stopped, breathing hard and dripping wet, Felicity looked at him and said,
"Promise me something." "What?"
"That you won't waste the time you have left pretending you're fine." He looked into her eyes that didn't pity.
"Only cared. I'll try," he whispered. "Good," she said, her voice trembling slightly.
"Because if you forget, I'll remind you." Marvin smiled, brushing a wet strand of hair from her face. "You really are dangerous, Felicity," she laughed softly.
"Then you shouldn't have asked me to come with you." He leaned closer, voice low.
"I'm glad I did." That night, long after she fell asleep, Marvin sat by the window again, watching the rain trace patterns on the glass. His chest ached, not just from sickness, but from the unbearable beauty of being alive. He whispered into the quiet,
Almost like a confession. I wish I had met you sooner, but deep down,
he knew. If he had, maybe he wouldn't have been ready to love her like this. The morning sun slipped through the half-drawn curtains, painting golden lines across the marble floor of the penthouse. Felicity woke first. Marvin was still asleep on the couch, his breathing shallow, his arm resting loosely over his chest. She smiled faintly, then moved quietly around the room, picking up the scattered maps, receipts, and postcards they had collected. Her eyes caught something half hidden beneath a pile of folded shirts. A thick envelope stamped Zurich Medical Center. Her heart skipped. She hesitated, fingers hovering over it, then slowly pulled it out. Inside were medical reports. She scanned the first line: stage adenocarcinoma, terminal prognosis, life expectancy less than 3 months without treatment. Her vision blurred. For a moment, the world fell silent. No sound of waves, no birds outside, no breath in her lungs, just the hollow echo of her own heartbeat. She turned toward Marvin. He was still sleeping, his face peaceful, unguarded. Tears burned her eyes. She pressed a trembling hand over her mouth to keep from making a sound. When he stirred, she quickly wiped her face and turned away. But it was too late. "Felicity?" His voice was rough, half awake. She froze, the envelope still in her hand. "What's that?" he asked, sitting up slowly. She looked at him, her lips quivering. "You tell me." His gaze dropped to the envelope, and in that instant, something inside him, some wall he'd carefully built, crumbled. He didn't try to take it from her. He just sighed. "You weren't supposed to see that. Why?" Her voice cracked.
"Because I was supposed to think you're fine. That this is just a vacation?"
He looked down, unable to meet her eyes.
"I didn't want this trip to become a funeral countdown." Her throat tightened.
"You should have told me." "I didn't want your pity," he said quietly. She let out a shaky breath, tears falling freely now.
"Pity? You think that's what this is?"
She stepped closer, her voice trembling between anger and heartbreak.
"I left everything behind, Marvin.
My plans, my sanity, because something in me told me I needed to know you."
All of you. And you still decided to lie." He rubbed his temples, eyes shut. "It wasn't a lie, it was avoidance." She let out a short, bitter laugh.
"You're unbelievable. I didn't want you to look at me and see an expiration date." She stared at him for a long moment, her chest rising and falling.
"You idiot," she whispered.
"I looked at you and saw life. For the first time in years, I felt alive again because you were." Marvin's eyes softened, the tension in his shoulders collapsing under the weight of her words. "I thought if you knew," he said quietly, "you'd start counting the days. And I wanted to pretend we had more than that." Felicity shook her head, tears streaming down. "You can't love someone halfway, Marvin. Not even when you're dying." He looked at her, really looked, as if memorizing every line of her face. Then slowly he stood and walked toward her.
"You think this is love?" "I don't know," she whispered.
"But it feels like something real."
And I'm terrified of losing it. He stopped right in front of her.
So am I. They stood in silence, the air between them thick with everything unspoken. Outside, the sound of church bells drifted over the water. He reached up and brushed a tear from her cheek with the back of his hand. You shouldn't have to carry this. Too late, she whispered, her voice breaking. You made me care. He gave a small, helpless smile.
I ruin everything I touch. She caught his hand before he could pull away.
Then maybe it's time you let someone help you fix it. For a heartbeat, neither moved. Then Marvin leaned forward, his forehead resting gently against hers. You don't deserve this pain. And you don't deserve to face it alone, she replied. Something inside him finally gave way. He pulled her into his arms. Not the way a man embraces a lover, but the way a drowning soul clings to something that keeps it afloat. That night, the rain returned, a soft drizzle over the canal, washing the streets clean. They sat together on the balcony, wrapped in a single blanket. Felicity's head rested on his shoulder. Tell me everything, she whispered. He took a long breath. It started a year ago. I ignored the pain. I thought it was just exhaustion. Too much work, too much pressure. By the time I saw a doctor, it was already too late. She squeezed his hand, listening quietly. They said I had months,
Maybe less. I did the treatments, the chemo, the tests.
It didn't change much, so I stopped. She turned to him. He nodded. I didn't want to spend the rest of my life being a patient.
I wanted to spend it.
Being a person, and that's when you decided to travel. He smiled faintly. I didn't plan to meet anyone.
Especially not someone like you. Felicity felt her throat tighten again.
Someone like me? Someone who makes dying look like a terrible inconvenience, he said, chuckling weakly. She laughed through her tears. You're impossible. He looked at her then, his expression soft and raw. No, Felicity, you're impossible. For making me want to live when I'd already made peace with dying. The words hung between them, fragile and glowing. She reached out, brushing her fingers along his cheek. Then don't die pretending you're alone. He closed his eyes, a tear slipping free. I'm not alone anymore. The rain fell harder, drumming softly against the glass. Felicity turned his face toward hers and kissed him, gently, tremblingly, as if she were trying to memorize the taste of borrowed time. It wasn't a kiss of passion, but of truth. Of two broken people finding the courage to love, even when the ending was already written. When they finally parted, he whispered, "What are you doing to me?" She smiled faintly through her tears. "Teaching you how to live." And for the first time since he'd learned he was dying, Marvin let himself believe. Maybe he still could. The morning light over Kyoto was softer than anywhere else, gentle, almost shy, as it filtered through the paper windows of their ryokan. Felicity woke first, the scent of green tea and fresh tatami filling the air. For a brief moment, she forgot everything.
The illness.
The time limit. The inevitable. Then Marvin coughed softly beside her. It was a quiet sound, but enough to break the illusion. She turned. He was sitting up, pale, rubbing his chest lightly. "Just morning air," he murmured, catching her worried gaze. "You said that yesterday," she replied softly. He smiled, faintly. Then it must still be true. Felicity didn't argue. She just poured him a cup of tea, her hands trembling slightly. The steam curled up like ghosts between them. Outside, the cherry blossoms were in full bloom. Later that morning, they walked along the philosopher's path, the narrow walkway lined with sakura trees. The petals fell around them in soft flurries,
Landing on Marvin's dark coat in Felicity's hair.
on the quiet water beside them. "It looks like snow," he said. "Except it doesn't melt," she replied. He looked at her, smiling. "Neither do memories." She stopped, turning to him.
Is that what this is, Marvin?
"Just memories you're collecting before you go?" He hesitated. "Maybe, but they're the only kind that lasts." Her eyes softened, though her chest tightened. Then let's make sure they're worth remembering. They spent hours exploring Kyoto like curious children, feeding koi fish at Ginkakuji, getting lost among the red torii gates of Fushimi Inari, tasting street food until they both laughed at how full they were. At a small temple, Felicity found a table filled with iema, wooden plaques where people wrote their wishes. "Write one," Marvin said. She picked up a pen. "You first," he chuckled weakly. "Ladies first," she frowned but obeyed, writing quickly before hanging the plaque. When he stepped closer, he read it aloud.
"I wish for time, not more, just enough." He looked at her, his throat tight. "That's not fair." "Neither is life," she whispered. He turned away slightly, pulling out his own plaque.
When he finished writing, he hung it next to hers. "What did you write?" she asked. He smiled softly. "That you'll forget me kindly." Her eyes glistened. "Don't you dare ask me that." That night, Felicity took out her old camera, the one she hadn't touched in years. "You're documenting everything now?" Marvin teased from across the room, lying on the futon, a faint smile on his lips. "I'm preserving proof," she said. "Proof of what?"
"That you were here."
"That we were," he chuckled quietly. "Sounds like you're building a museum of moments." She pointed the camera at him. "Hold still," he groaned playfully. "I don't photograph well." "Then I'll take bad pictures of you until you do." The flash went off. Marvin blinked, disoriented, then laughed. "You're impossible." "And you're photogenic," she said, lowering the camera. "Maybe it's just you seeing me through different eyes." She paused, smiling faintly.
"Maybe it's because I see you." The next morning, Marvin woke up later than usual.
Felicity sat by his side, quietly flipping through the developed photos. His face was peaceful, his breathing shallow. She reached over to brush a lock of hair from his forehead. "You should wake up," she whispered. "The world's waiting." He opened his eyes, slowly smiling.
"You sound like an optimist." "Don't get used to it." He laughed weakly, but soon it turned into another cough.
She immediately helped him sit up, worry flashing across her face. He waved it off. "I'm okay." She didn't believe him, but she didn't push either. Instead, she reached for her camera and snapped another photo of him right then. "In that fragile morning light, what was that for?" he asked, still catching his breath. "So I'll remember this moment," she said softly. "Not because it's perfect, but because it's real." He smiled faintly, eyes half closed. "You make a month feel like a lifetime." "And you," she whispered, "make every day worth waking up for." That evening, they attended a small lantern festival by the Kamo River. The sky turned violet, and the river glowed with hundreds of paper lanterns drifting downstream. Felicity held one between her palms, its light flickering against her skin. "What do we write on it?" she asked. Marvin thought for a moment, then said, "Nothing. Let's just let it go." She nodded. Together, they placed the lantern on the water, watching it float away. Slow, graceful, inevitable. As it disappeared into the distance, she reached for his hand. He intertwined his fingers with hers, holding on tightly, as if anchoring himself to the moment. "Promise me something," she said. "Anything. When you're gone, if you're gone, I'll still travel.
I'll still take photos.
But I want you to promise that wherever you are, you'll find a way to keep watching." He looked at her, eyes shimmering in the lantern light. "Then you'd better make the world beautiful enough for me to see." That night, back at the ryokan, Felicity downloaded the photos from her camera onto her laptop. Each image told a story. Marvin laughing with ice cream dripping down his hand, Marvin squinting in the sunlight, Marvin asleep under a cherry blossom tree. She named the folder "A Month That Felt Like Forever." When she turned around, Marvin was watching her, his expression soft. "You really think you can trap time in pictures?"
"No," she whispered.
"But I can hold on to it for a little longer." He smiled faintly. "You're stronger than I thought." She came closer, sitting beside him. "No, Marvin,
I'm just loving someone who makes me brave. He reached out, touching her cheek gently.
Then I'll try to be worth your courage. The following morning, Felicity woke to find him already dressed, standing by the window, staring at the horizon. "What are you doing up so early?" she asked, voice still heavy with sleep. He turned, smiling faintly. "Just trying to remember what sunrise looks like, in case I forget." Her heart clenched. She crossed the room, stood beside him and said quietly, "Then we'll see every sunrise together, until you don't have to remember anymore." He didn't answer. He just took her hand, and for the first time she felt the tremor in his fingers ease. Outside, the first light of dawn bathed the world in gold, and in that fleeting moment Felicity believed, maybe, just maybe, love really could slow down time. The phone call came just after midnight. Marvin was sitting alone on the balcony, the city of Kyoto asleep beneath a sky washed with stars. The soft chime of his phone startled him. He glanced at the screen. Dr. Keller, Zurich Medical Institute. He hesitated before answering. "This is Marvin. Mr. Hale?" The voice on the other end was calm, clinical. "We've reviewed your file. There's an ongoing immunotherapy trial in Zurich. It's highly experimental, but the preliminary results are promising." "How long?" Marvin asked quietly. "There's no guarantee. But you'd need to begin within the next 2 weeks." He sat back in silence, watching his reflection in the glass. Pale, tired, unrecognizable. Can it really work?
"There's a chance," the doctor replied gently.
Small but real. Marvin closed his eyes. For a moment, he could see Felicity's smile, hear her laughter echoing through the narrow Kyoto streets. The thought of her waiting, hoping, watching him fade. It made his chest tighten more than the illness ever did. "I'll think about it," he whispered. When the call ended, he sat there for a long time, staring at the night sky, feeling both the weight of hope and the terror it carried. The next morning, Felicity found him already dressed. He was folding a map, his suitcase half-packed. "You're up early," she said, smiling, rubbing her eyes. He turned slightly, forcing a casual tone.
"Couldn't sleep. Where are you going?"
she asked. Noticing the suitcase, he froze for half a second, then said, "Just thought I'd send some luggage ahead to Tokyo, less to carry." It was a clumsy lie. Felicity's smile faltered, but she didn't press further. Not yet. Something in her gut whispered that something was wrong. For the rest of the day, Marvin seemed distracted. He laughed at her jokes, but his eyes were distant, lost somewhere she couldn't reach. When she asked if he was tired, he just smiled. "No, just thinking." That night, after dinner, he excused himself early. Felicity waited a few minutes before walking to the balcony. The sliding door was slightly open, the wind rustling the curtains. On the small table beside the chair, she saw it, a folded flight ticket. Her heart stopped. "Zurich, 1:45 a.m. No," she whispered, grabbing it. In the distance, thunder rumbled. She ran through the quiet hallway, her bare feet slapping against the wooden floor. By the time she reached the entrance, rain was already falling hard outside. She spotted him halfway down the street, suitcase in hand, coat collar turned up against the storm. "Marvin!" she shouted. He stopped. Slowly, he turned. Rain poured down his face, mixing with the look of guilt in his eyes. "Go back inside, Felicity," he said, voice breaking through the rain. She shook her head, running toward him. "You were just going to leave?"
"I didn't want you to see this," he said, almost pleading.
"I can't drag you through another goodbye."
"Not when I don't even know if—" "Don't you dare finish that sentence."
She cut him off, her voice trembling.
"You don't get to decide what I can handle. I was trying to protect you," he shouted. "From what? Hope?"
She cried, rain dripping from her hair.
"You think hope is cruel?"
"It's the only thing that's kept me alive since the day I met you." He took a step closer, eyes burning.
"If I die, it'll destroy you." She looked at him, chest heaving. "Then let me be destroyed, Marvin."
Because I'd rather break loving you than live pretending you never happened. The silence that followed was deafening, broken only by the sound of the rain and the thunder cracking above them. He dropped the suitcase. It hit the ground with a dull thud. "Why are you doing this?" he whispered. "Because," she said through tears, "you're not the only one who's afraid. But running won't save either of us." He covered his face with both hands, his body shaking.
"I can't promise it'll work. I can't promise I'll come back." She stepped forward, taking his hands and lowering them gently.
"Then promise me you'll try." He looked at her, soaked, trembling, defiant. The woman who had turned his final month into something worth fighting for. "I don't deserve you," he said, voice barely audible. "Good thing I'm not asking you to," she replied, smiling through her tears. Then he coughed, hard, blood streaking his lips. She caught him before he fell, holding his head against her shoulder. "Marvin!" she cried, panicked. He tried to speak, but his voice was barely a whisper. "If I survive,
"I'll come back to you." "Then I'll wait," she said, clutching him tighter as rain poured down around them.
no matter how long it takes, I'll wait." He smiled faintly against her neck, the edges of his consciousness blurring. "You make dying sound like something I could delay," he murmured. "Then delay it," she whispered fiercely. "Delay it for me." By the time the ambulance arrived, her clothes were drenched, her hands trembling as she clung to his. As the paramedics loaded him inside, Marvin caught her gaze one last time. "Don't stop living," he said weakly. She nodded, tears falling fast.
"Don't stop trying." Then the doors closed,
and the siren wailed into the night. Felicity stood there long after the lights disappeared, the rain washing down her face, her heart pounding with a single thought. He wasn't gone yet, and as long as he was alive, she would not stop believing. The world blurred into white and antiseptic silence. Marvin woke to the soft hum of machines, the faint sting of an IV in his arm, and a voice, calm, distant, saying his name. "Mr. Hale, can you hear me?" He blinked against the harsh light. Zurich, the hospital room smelled like metal and rain. His chest burned when he tried to breathe too deeply. "You've been through the first round of therapy," Dr. Keller explained. You responded.
"Better than we expected."
"But the next phase will be harder." Marvin nodded weakly. "How long?" 6 weeks, the doctor replied. "And no guarantees." Marvin closed his eyes, sinking back against the pillow. He wasn't afraid of the pain. He was afraid of the quiet, of the world moving on without him, of Felicity's laughter fading into memory. He wondered if she still waited. Across the ocean, in a small apartment in London, Felicity stared at her phone. No messages, no calls, no updates. It had been 2 weeks since the night in Kyoto. 2 weeks since she last saw his face, pale and trembling in the rain. Every morning, she sat at her desk and wrote him an email. Not long, not desperate, just pieces of life. Day 3, the tulips on the balcony finally bloomed. "I think you'd like them. They're stubborn, just like you." Day 10, "I walked through the market today. Heard a man playing the violin, same song we danced to in the rain. I smiled instead of crying, this time." Day 17, "Sometimes I talk to you, even when I know you can't answer. Maybe you hear me anyway." She attached photos, her coffee mug beside the morning light, the empty chair across from her, a sky that looked too big for one person to hold alone, and every night she whispered the same prayer before bed. "Stay." Back in Zurich,
Marvin was fighting. The treatment hit him harder than expected. Nausea, exhaustion, pain that crawled through every bone.
some days he couldn't even lift his head. The nurses came and went like ghosts, their voices soft, faces hidden behind masks. On the worst nights, He dreamed of Felicity, standing under the rain.
shouting his name. Don't you dare disappear again.
He woke with tears on his face, gasping for breath, his chest aching from more than just illness. Dr. Keller checked his vitals. "You're improving, Mr. Hale. Slowly, but it's there." Marvin tried to smile. "Improving feels a lot like dying." "Sometimes healing does," the doctor replied gently. One morning, a nurse walked in holding a tablet. "You have mail?" He blinked, confused. "Mail?" "Yes," she said with a small smile. "From someone named Felicity Bennett." His heart stopped for a second. He reached out, hands trembling as she handed it over. The email opened with a photo, the London skyline at sunrise, and beneath it her words, "I don't know if you're still alive, but I'm still waiting at the airport." He laughed, a broken, wet sound that startled even himself. The nurse looked alarmed, but he waved her off.
"I'm fine," he said between gasps, though tears were streaming down his face. He read it again, slower this time.
"Still waiting at the airport." He could almost see her there, sitting by the window, wearing that white dress she never got to use, looking out at planes taking off. He whispered,
Voice raw, "You're insane, Felicity." Then he smiled.
"And I love you for it." The next days blurred into a rhythm of pain and perseverance. He read her old messages over and over, drawing strength from each one. When the nurses changed his IV, he whispered her name like a mantra. When he couldn't sleep, he replayed their laughter under the cherry blossoms. When he wanted to give up, he remembered her saying, "Then delay it for me." And somehow, he did. 6 weeks later, the pain had dulled, replaced by a fragile stillness. When Dr. Keller came in with his clipboard, Marvin didn't expect much. The doctor smiled, the kind of rare smile that carried weight. "Your scans are showing significant remission."
It's too soon to declare anything permanent, but
"Mr. Hale, you're responding." Marvin blinked, disbelieving.
so I'm not dying yet.
The doctor chuckled softly.
Not today. Marvin leaned back, eyes closing.
For the first time in months, he didn't feel afraid to breathe. He whispered, almost to himself, "I promised her I'd come back." That night, after everyone left, he opened his laptop. His hands still shook as he typed, slowly, painfully. To Felicity Bennett. Subject, still waiting. Message, "I saw the sunrise today. It looked a lot like you. Warm, stubborn, and impossible to ignore. I don't know what tomorrow looks like, but I think I might just get there."
So wait a little longer, okay?
He hesitated, then added one last line. "You once said we didn't need forever, just the right moment."
I think this might be ours. He hit send outside.
The snow began to fall over Zurich, soft and silent, and for the first time, Marvin Hale, the man who once counted his days, let himself believe there might still be more to count. A year had passed since the night of the storm. The world had moved on, and so had Felicity. Or at least, that's what she told herself each morning when she watched the sun rise over Santorini. The air smelled of salt and lemons, the sky always a little too blue, the sea endless. She worked as a tour guide now, leading groups of travelers through narrow cobblestone streets and whitewashed cliffs. She smiled when they smiled, laughed when they took photos, and learned to hide the ache that sometimes caught her in the quiet moments. Every morning, before heading to work, she checked her inbox, and every morning it was empty. On her days off, she sat by the cafe near the cliff's edge, the same spot she'd written her last email to Marvin. The cafe owner, a kind old Greek man named Theo, always brought her the same order, iced espresso and almond cake. "You wait for someone?" Theo would ask in his rough accent. She always smiled. Not anymore. But she still faced the sea every time, as if waiting for it to return something it had taken. That afternoon, the wind was strong, carrying laughter and the scent of sea spray. Felicity was leading a small group through Oya's winding lanes when a sudden gust scattered the tourists' hats and brochures. "All right, everyone," she called, laughing. "Stay close, or I'll have to start charging rescue fees." They laughed, and she guided them toward a restaurant overlooking the caldera, a place painted in sunset gold. It was crowded, and she scanned the tables for empty seats. Then she saw one, a small corner near the balcony. "Perfect. Please sit wherever you like," she said. As the group settled, she began explaining the history of the cliffs, her voice calm and bright. The sea stretched infinitely below, shimmering under the late afternoon light. And then a voice, deep and warm, spoke from behind her. "Is this seat taken?" The world stilled. That voice, she knew it too well. Felicity turned slowly, her breath caught somewhere between disbelief and fear. Marvin stood there, sunlight washing over him, the sea breeze ruffling his hair. He looked different. Thinner, yes, but alive. His skin carried color again, and the hollowness that once shadowed his eyes was gone. For a heartbeat, she couldn't move, couldn't speak. He smiled, and that same quiet, crooked smile that once made her believe in miracles. "You came back," she whispered. He nodded, voice soft. "You waited." Her hands trembled.
"I didn't know if you were dead."
He chuckled lightly.
"I wasn't sure either for a while." Her laugh broke into a sob.
Before she knew it, she'd crossed the distance between them and thrown her arms around him. He held her close, his heartbeat strong against her ear. "Easy," he murmured.
"You'll make people talk." "I don't care," she cried softly. "You're real. I told you I'd try," he said.
"Turns out you make a very convincing reason to stay alive." They sat together on the balcony as the sun began to set, the crowd thinning until only the sound of the wind remained. Felicity finally asked, voice trembling, "How?" He leaned back, watching the sea turn to liquid fire. "After the last treatment, they said the cancer had stabilized. I didn't believe it at first."
"I couldn't, but months passed, and I kept breathing." She smiled through her tears.
"That's a miracle," he nodded slowly.
"Maybe, or maybe it's you. Me?"
She frowned. "I read your emails," he said softly.
"Every one of them, even the ones you sent after I stopped replying."
"They kept me alive more than any medicine." She covered her mouth, tears falling again. "You read them?" He nodded.
"Every morning."
"I used to imagine you sitting by that window in London, talking to me like I was still there."
And somehow I was. Her laugh cracked through her tears. "I thought I was talking to a ghost." "Well," he smiled faintly, "you must be very good at summoning them." The sky turned orange, the Aegean Sea burning with light.
Marvin reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a folded piece of paper. "I never sent this," he said, handing it to her. She unfolded it carefully. It was an email draft. Subject, "The view from Zurich." Message, "I saw the sunrise today."
It reminded me of you, stubborn, beautiful, impossible to ignore.
"I don't know how long I'll have, but I know what I want to do with it."
Find you. Felicity looked up, tears slipping down her cheeks. "And you did," she whispered. "I promised," he said, simply. They sat in silence for a long time,
watching the horizon fade into twilight. Finally, Felicity spoke.
"What now?"
He smiled, reaching for her hand.
"Now I live?"
"With you if you'll have me." She squeezed his hand tightly.
"Oh, I never stopped having you." He chuckled, brushing a tear from her face.
"Still stubborn, huh?"
"Always." "Good," he said softly.
"Because I need someone stubborn to remind me not to waste this second chance." When the last light disappeared, Marvin stood, offering her his hand. "Come on," he said.
"Let's go get lost somewhere." She laughed through the tears.
"You haven't changed at all," he grinned. "That's not true."
"I'm technically a miracle patient now." She shook her head, taking his hand. "You're impossible." He leaned in close, whispering.
"And yet you're still here." I always will be, she murmured. And as they walked down the narrow street, the lanterns above flickered to life, lighting their path with a golden glow, like the universe itself was welcoming them home. For the first time in a long time, Felicity didn't feel like she was waiting anymore, because the man she'd waited for had found his way back. The next morning, Santorini woke beneath a golden sunrise, soft light spilling over the white rooftops, the sea glimmering below like liquid glass. Felicity stirred awake, feeling the warmth of the sunlight before she even opened her eyes. When she turned, Marvin was already sitting by the window, a cup of coffee in hand, watching the horizon. "You're up early," she said, voice still drowsy. He smiled without turning. "Still trying to catch up on all the mornings I almost missed?" She sat up, pulling the sheet around her shoulders.
"You say that like a poet," he chuckled.
"No, just a man who's still surprised to be alive." They ate breakfast together on the balcony. Toasted bread, fresh figs, and Greek yogurt. Marvin spread jam clumsily, his hands still trembling a little from the after-effects of treatment. Felicity reached over, steadying it gently. He grinned. "You're never going to stop doing that, are you?" "Doing what?"
"Catching me before I fall," she smiled. "Maybe I just like proving you still need me," he laughed, leaning back in his chair. "I do, probably more than I should." There was a long pause, comfortable,
filled with the sound of waves below and the distant chatter of morning tourists. Then, quietly, he said, "Do you want to know what happened after I left?" Felicity's breath hitched slightly. "Only if you want to tell me," he nodded. "I think you deserve to know." He told her about Zurich, the sterile rooms, the sleepless nights, the endless tests. How he wanted to give up after the third round, when his body refused to cooperate. How he kept hearing her voice, "Then delay it for me," and found the strength to keep going. He spoke of the night the doctors told him the cancer had shrunk, how he didn't believe them at first, how he lay awake until sunrise, waiting for the pain to come back. "It didn't," he said softly, "and that scared me more than the disease." "Why?" she asked gently. "Because I didn't know what to do with life once I had it again." She reached for his hand, her thumb brushing over his scarred knuckles. "So you decided to find me," he smiled faintly. "You were the only thing that ever made sense." They sat in silence for a while after that. Not awkward, just full of everything they didn't need to say. Felicity finally broke it, teasing, "So you tracked me down halfway across the world. Impressive for someone who barely checked his email before." "I had help," he said, pretending to look offended. "Theo, your cafe friend, nearly bit my head off before telling me where to find you." She laughed, picturing the gruff Greek man.
"Of course he did." Marvin leaned forward, resting his elbows on the table.
"When I saw you standing there guiding tourists like you'd been doing it all your life, I realized—"
"You'd built something beautiful after I left." "I tried to," she said quietly.
"But it never felt whole." He reached into his jacket pocket then, pulling out a small wooden box.
"Maybe this will help," she frowned, suspicious.
"If that's another postcard, I swear—" "Open it!" Inside were 2 plane tickets. Destination, Paris. Felicity looked up, eyes wide. "Paris?" he nodded. "Where we met, where everything started." Her throat tightened. "You want to go back?" he smiled.
"I want to start over."
Not as a dying man chasing a final month, but as someone who finally has forever. She stared at the tickets for a long time. The sunlight caught the edge of the paper, and for a second she saw herself again, that girl at the airport, in the white dress, holding on to a dream that had just shattered. And now, across from her, sat the man who had pieced it back together. She looked up, tears glimmering in her eyes.
"Paris, huh?"
"Yeah. Do I get to choose the hotel this time?" He grinned. "You can choose everything this time." She laughed softly, shaking her head.
"You're serious about this?" "Completely." He leaned closer, voice gentle but sure. "The first time we met, I was dying."
"This time I'm alive."
Let me prove it, her breath caught. Marvin,
she whispered.
what if we go back and it's not the same?
He smiled sadly. Then we'll make it new. They left the cafe later that day, walking along the cliffside paths hand in hand. The air smelled of salt and sun, the sea below glittering like liquid sapphire. Felicity stopped for a moment, gazing out over the endless horizon. I used to think forever was about time, she said softly. Now I think it's about moments. The kind that stay even when everything else changes, Marvin nodded. Then let's fill our forever with those, she turned to him, smiling. Deal. That evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, Marvin took out his phone and snapped a photo. Felicity, standing against the orange sky, her hair tangled in the wind, laughter caught mid-breath. She groaned. You took a picture of me without warning? He smirked. Revenge. You started it. Let me see. He showed her, and she gasped softly. It wasn't perfect. Her hair was messy, her eyes half closed. But it was real. She looked up at him. It's beautiful, he nodded.
So are you. As night fell, they sat together under a blanket, the stars spilling across the dark sky. Paris, she said dreamily.
Do you think it'll still feel like magic? He smiled. With you, it always will. Felicity rested her head on his shoulder, whispering, Then let's go see what forever looks like. He kissed the top of her head, his voice low against her hair. Forever looks a lot like this. And for the first time, neither of them feared the morning, because this time it wasn't borrowed time. It was the beginning of the life they chose. Paris glowed in the late afternoon light. A soft, honeyed gold that seemed to melt over the rooftops and wash the streets in warmth. The Eiffel Tower loomed in the distance, its steel frame shimmering like a promise. Marvin and Felicity walked hand in hand along the Seine, the cool autumn breeze tugging playfully at her scarf. Street musicians played an old French tune nearby, violins blending with the hum of city life. Déjà vu, Felicity whispered, smiling. Marvin glanced down at her. Except this time no one's crying in an airport, she chuckled. You're right. This time I'm exactly where I want to be. They stopped at a small cafe by the river. The same one where Felicity had once sat years ago.
Alone and lost, staring into a cup of untouched coffee. Now,
across from her sat Marvin, alive, smiling, eyes full of light. I can't believe we're back, she said softly. Neither can I, he admitted. When I left Zurich, I promised myself that if I ever made it here again, it wouldn't be as a goodbye. She reached across the table, fingers brushing his.
And is it?
He shook his head. No. This time, it's the beginning. They spent the next few days like tourists rediscovering a city they used to dream about, walking through Montmartre's narrow alleys, stealing kisses beneath lamplights, getting lost on purpose just to find their way back to each other. Marvin had changed. He was still the man with quiet confidence and sharp wit, but now there was softness in him, the kind born from gratitude, not grief. One evening, they climbed the hill at Trocadero just before sunset. Felicity's laughter echoed as she tried to chase the last of the light with her camera, hair whipping in the wind. Marvin watched her, the world slowing around him, every sound. The distant chatter, the rustling leaves, her voice felt like a symphony composed just for that moment. When she turned to him, breathless, she asked, "What are you thinking?" He smiled faintly. That I used to count time in days left. Now I count it in moments like this. As night began to fall, the Eiffel Tower flickered to life, golden lights blooming across the iron lattice. Felicity gasped softly. I forgot how beautiful it is. Marvin stepped closer. You said that once before. She looked up at him.
Did I? Yeah, he said, smiling.
You were standing right about here, in a white dress, pretending you weren't crying. She laughed, blushing.
God, don't remind me. He reached out, brushing a strand of hair from her face. I remember thinking that maybe heartbreak could be beautiful, if it led me to you. Her breath caught.
Marvin, but before she could say more, he took her hand and led her toward the open plaza. The city was alive. Lovers, tourists, and strangers crossing paths beneath the tower's glow. Marvin stopped right in the center, turning to face her. Felicity tilted her head, puzzled. What are you doing? He smiled softly, finishing what I started. From his coat pocket he pulled out a small velvet box. Her breath hitched, and the world seemed to fall silent around them. He went down on one knee. Felicity Morgan, he began, voice trembling slightly. The first time I met you, I was running away from life. You made me stop running. Her eyes filled with tears. The first time I asked you to be with me, it was out of fear. Fear of dying, fear of being alone. But this time, he opened the box. Inside was a simple gold ring that caught the light like a sunrise. But this time it's out of love, because I finally know what it means to live, and I can't imagine doing it without you. Tears spilled down her cheeks.
You're serious?
She whispered. He smiled. Completely. A soft wind swept through the plaza, carrying the faint sound of applause as onlookers realized what was happening. Felicity laughed through her tears. You really picked the most public place possible, he grinned. That way you can't say no. She knelt down in front of him, eyes shining.
I wasn't going to. Marvin exhaled shakily as she whispered, Yes, 1,000 times yes. They stood, and the crowd around them broke into cheers.
Someone shouted, Kiss her! And Marvin didn't hesitate. He pulled Felicity close, kissing her under the golden lights. The Eiffel Tower sparkled above them, the city roaring in celebration, but all Felicity could feel was his heartbeat against hers. Steady.
Alive, real. When they finally pulled away,
Marvin whispered. You gave me life when I had no reason to live, she smiled, brushing her thumb along his jaw. You gave me love when I'd stopped believing it existed. He took her hand, placing the ring on her finger. Then I guess we both found what we were looking for. No, she corrected softly. We made it. Later that night they walked along the Seine again, their shadows long and intertwined under the lamplight. I used to think forever was something that happened to other people, Felicity said. Marvin looked down at her. And now? She smiled. Now I think it's something you choose, every day, every minute, he nodded slowly. Then let's keep choosing it. They stopped near the bridge, where the city reflected off the water like a dream reborn. Felicity rested her head against his chest. You know, she murmured, for someone who only had a month to live, you've been doing a terrible job of dying, he laughed softly. That's because I finally found something worth living for. The camera of a passing tourist clicked, capturing them under the Paris lights, the ring glinting on her hand, the tower shining behind them, and if someone looked closely at that picture, they'd see it. Two people who had run out of time once, but somehow, through love and courage, made more of it. Because they didn't find forever. They created it.